The statutory obligations surrounding maternity leave do not function as loose guidelines. They operate as a strictly assembled legal architecture, binding employers to rigid deadlines. Sections 45 through 50 of the Labor Code define these requirements. They are not arbitrary corporate HR policies subject to negotiation or internal amendments. Instead, the law functions as a highly regulated, mathematically precise compliance ecosystem, where specific actions must be executed within exact timeframes. This diagram maps the foundation of that legislation. It establishes a non-negotiable 120-day temporal block, which symmetrically splits into 60 days of pre-delivery leave and 60 days of post-delivery leave. Accessing this block requires passing through specific logic gates. The first critical variable is tenure. An employee must have at least 6 months of continuous employment under their current employer immediately preceding delivery. The second variable restricts eligibility based on demographics. Full statutory benefits require the employee to have fewer than 2 living children at the time of delivery. Once those conditions are met, the resulting financial liability is calculated using a strict mathematical constant, dividing the gross wage exactly by 26. Standard HR intuition is insufficient for managing this process. Employers must map the precise eligibility gates, financial disbursement mechanics, and statutory protections step by step to avoid severe legal penalties. Looking at this master timeline, we see that employer obligations begin long before the actual leave period. The earliest statutory trigger point activates 10 weeks prior to the expected delivery date. During this 10-week window, Section 45 strictly prohibits assigning the employee any work that is arduous, requires long periods of standing, or is otherwise harmful. The law outlines a specific exception for tea garden workers, who are permitted to perform light duties during this time, provided they receive medical clearance from the garden's physician and continue to draw their regular wages. Moving past the delivery zero point, Section 45 dictates an absolute prohibition on labor. No employer may knowingly permit or require a woman to work in any establishment for the 60 days immediately following childbirth. With the labor restrictions mapped out, Section 46 defines the exact parameters for financial compensation. This flowchart charts the eligibility gate. Condition A verifies the employee's tenure. If they do not have a minimum of 6 months continuous service prior to delivery, the financial obligation terminates. If they do, the logic proceeds. Condition B checks the demographic requirement. The mother must have fewer than 2 living children at the time of delivery to qualify for full payout. If Condition B fails, meaning the employee already has 2 or more living children, the statutory mandate shifts. The employer is no longer required to provide financial compensation, though the employee remains entitled to any standard leave they have accrued. By applying this strict Boolean logic, financial liability is entirely conditional, requiring active tracking weeks before the actual absence begins. Sections 47.1 through 47.3 establish that the 120-day timeline does not start automatically. It is initiated by a specific notice from the employee, which can be delivered either verbally or in writing, creating 2 distinct operational paths for HR. Returning to our timeline, the first operational route is Path A, the preemptive notice. Here, the employee notifies the employer that delivery is expected within 60 days. In response to Path A, the employer must grant the full 120 days of continuous leave, beginning the exact day after the notice is received. If no preemptive notice is filed, operations default to the second route, Path B, the reactive notice. Path B carries a strict deadline. The employee must provide notice to the employer within 7 days post-delivery. In this scenario, the employer must grant the 120-day leave retroactively, calculating the total time frame outward from the actual date of delivery. The initiation triggers differ completely, yet both paths mandate the exact same 120-day quantum of leave. The specific timing of the employee's notice dictates the precise start date of the employer's statutory liability window, meaning HR systems must be capable of adapting to either path instantly. This formula determines the exact financial liability under Section 48. The benefit is paid by calculating the daily average wage. The denominator here is critical. The latest monthly gross wage must be divided strictly by 26, not 30, ensuring weekends are excluded from the daily rate calculation. Calculating the exact TACA amount is only the first step. The law dictates rigid schedules for when those funds must be transferred to the employee. Section 47 enforces a universal statutory constraint for disbursements. Payments must be executed within a strict 3-working-day window following the submission of proof. Acceptable proof includes a medical certificate from a registered physician or a certified extract from a birth register. This Gantt chart visualizes option A, the split payment method. When the employee submits medical proof of expected delivery, it triggers a tight 3-day window for the employer to disburse the 60-day pre-benefit. Once proof of birth is submitted, a second 3-day countdown begins, during which the employer must disburse the remaining 60-day post-benefit balance. Alternatively, the employer and employee can utilize option C, a lump sum method executed entirely after delivery. Under option C, the full 120-day financial benefit is consolidated and paid out entirely within 3 working days of receiving proof of birth. Proper financial compliance is measured by both mathematical accuracy and operational speed. Failing to execute the transaction within these rigid 72-hour windows constitutes a direct violation of the law. The statutory framework also accounts for structural anomalies that disrupt this standard 120-day progression. Looking back at the master timeline, Section 47 dictates the protocol for a miscarriage prior to the scheduled leave date. A premature miscarriage voids the specific maternity benefit. The employer's liability converts directly into standard health-related leave, granted according to medical necessity. Section 49 establishes the protocol for maternal mortality, addressing what happens if the mother dies during childbirth or within the 60-day post-delivery window. The employer's financial liability does not vanish upon death. The benefit accrues up to the exact date of the mother's passing. These accrued funds must be transferred to the individual assuming care of the child, a designated nominee, or the woman's legal representative. Finally, as shown here, Section 50 enforces strict anti-retaliation protections. An employer cannot bypass financial liability by dismissing, discharging, or removing an employee without sufficient cause within the 6 months prior to delivery or the 60 days after. This active insulation secures the worker's financial rights, ensuring that structural anomalies and unfair dismissals cannot shatter the legal framework protecting the benefit. Here is the complete legal architecture of the statutory maternity liability, fully assembled. At its core sits the non-negotiable 120-day liability block. Access to that block is regulated by strict gating mechanics, verifying 6 months of continuous tenure and a family size of fewer than 2 living children. The payout itself is locked to a rigid financial constant, calculating the daily rate exclusively at a 1/26th gross wage ratio. Executing the process without legal penalty relies entirely on precise record-keeping of notice dates and the rapid deployment of funds within 72-hour windows. HR practitioners must audit their internal software and operational protocols to ensure they map exactly to these specific statutory triggers. Mastering this algorithmic flowchart is the only way to transform a complex web of legal liabilities into a streamlined, compliant operational standard.